Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on our second webinar of our virtual Boots in the Barn. I'd like to welcome everybody. If you weren't here last Friday, we do have that webinar episode recorded. So if you go back into our Extension Dairy Team archive of webinars, you'll be able to find Dr. Sarah Adcock's webinar on disbudding practices. I thought that was a very good presentation, and we can't be in the barn right now, so we're trying to do these things virtually. So I thought she did a really good job of taking us out on the farm and showing us virtually how she's disbudding calves. So couple of housekeeping things before we start today. If you're on and you want to be able to mute your microphones and turn off your cameras, at least for the beginning portion, we will take questions. So if you want to type those questions into the chat box, we'll address those at the end of the presentation. And if people want to unmute and ask questions, we can definitely do that at that point as well. So while Emily's talking, I'm going to also upload her PDF presentation into the chat box as well. So if you want to be able to download and follow along, you can certainly do that. And then immediately after the program, I will email you an evaluation link to today's program. So I would appreciate if you guys, or if you ladies could fill that out and help us evaluate our programs that we're doing. That really helps us drive our programs. So again, you'll notice this is our second webinar. We do have one more webinar coming up on February 5th. So I'll have a panel of dairy women on that webinar. I just received some of their presentations this morning. So just really fun how they are capturing their video out on farm. And I think it's just going to be a really fun webinar to see what's going on their farms as well. So to start, Emily, I'm going to stop share my screen while I'm introducing you if you want to go ahead and get yours pulled up there. And so to start today's program, I'd like to introduce Emily Krekelberg. Emily grew up on her family's dairy farm near Le Sueur, Minnesota. She works for the University of Minnesota Extension as the Extension Educator for Farm Safety and Health. Her work focuses on grain bin safety, livestock safety, tractor safety, farm mental health, and suicide prevention. A passion of Emily's is advocating for wellness in agriculture. She has a BS in animal science and a master's in agricultural education from the University of Minnesota. And so today, Emily's presentation will be A Better Farm Starts with a Better You. And I've had the privilege of knowing Emily through our I-29 MOO University and lots of other extension programs. So I'm glad to have you on our webinar today, Emily.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jennifer. And as she mentioned, we've known each other for many years now, working in extension together. And I remember hearing about the Boots in the Barn program for quite some time, and I always thought it sounded really neat. And so it being virtual is hard, but it's really nice that I'm able to join in now. So thank you so much for having me. And thank you, all of you, for taking the time to be here. Hopefully you have the chance to have a little lunch and you can just eat while I chat away here. But yeah, so like Jennifer said, I work in farm safety and health for University of Minnesota Extension. And yeah, a big passion of mine and something I do a lot of work in is promoting wellness on the farm. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. And, a lot of these things also apply to off of the farm as well, just life in general, and I've started kind of referring to them as the different rituals you can do to keep yourself sane. So I really hope that you can get a lot out of this. And to start, actually, just to kind of frame up where people are coming from, where people are at with stress. I do have a poll. So Jennifer, if you can launch that, we're going to do that right away here.
All right, Emily. Yep.
Yeah, so you should see it up there. And the question is, how often do you experience farm-related stress? So, and then I have it in days of the week. So, just kind of give an average or your best guess. And when I say farm related, I know that not all of you on here are farmers, but may work in other areas of agriculture. So you know what's kind of related to work and to farming and ag, and what is maybe outside of that. But two, knowing that if you're on farm, family related stress may be farm related stress if you're all farming together. So yeah, please take a second to fill that out. All right. Okay. So no 0 to 1 days a week. We're all at least 2 days. I'm going to be honest. I thought there was going to be more in 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. So I'm happy that 40% of you are in 2 to 3 days. But that's still 2 to 3 days too many for a weekly basis. And I get that stress is a natural part of life, and I'll kind of comment on that here and there as we go through this presentation, that some amount of stress is good, is normal, and stress can actually serve as a motivator for people. And I think we all know that when we've had deadlines or different things, due dates that we're mindful of, that little bit of stress can help motivate us. But it's just when it gets to be more than a little bit of stress that we really need to be thinking about taking care of ourselves and what we're doing to help mitigate that stress, instead of letting it just continue to wash over us, and challenge our health and our well-being. So to start, I just want to offer some notes, some of my ideas on well-being, mental health, and mental illness, and on mental health and mental illness, especially. The research has just been accelerated so much in the last few decades, and so I know when I first started in this type of work, I didn't necessarily know all the lingo and all the words, and I think we hear all these buzzwords right now in media and everywhere else. And so I like to just offer a little bit of clarity, especially for the context of the conversation we're going to be having today. So also a note I'm going to make right away: well-being and wellness are two words that I use. They're interchangeable. So well-being and wellness, they like same thing. And both of them kind of relate to our overall health. So to illustrate that, I like to use this. It's a 3-legged milking stool. I'm sure many of you recognize it, maybe have one or had one in the past. And this is how I like to explain wellness to people. So a stool has 2 main components. It has the seat and it has the legs. So when we're thinking about wellness as a 3-legged milking stool, we know that the seat is the part that really supports all the weight. And so I want you to think about what, the seat is you, right? It's your ability to hold that weight. And so also think about what your weights are. And that's things like family commitments, farm commitments, volunteer commitments, hanging out with your friends. If you have an off-farm job or don't work on the farm, all of these things that we need to balance every day, that we need to have sitting on our stool every day. And so that core of wellness is really held in the seat. And, we are well when we can handle all of our weight and carry our load. So, of course, the second component of the stool is the legs. And the legs play a really important role in that they, keep the seat from just being a wooden disc on the ground, but also they are what hold up the seat and help support that weight in addition to the seat itself. And so I use 3 legs, and to me, each one of them represents a different area of our health. And so all 3 of these combine to promote our wellness and to represent our overall well-being and overall health. So to me, the legs represent physical health, mental health, and emotional health. So physical health, anything related to our bodies, right? That's a pretty easy one for most people. Anything related to our bodies is physical. Mental health and emotional health, I know sometimes people equate them or view them as the same thing. They are slightly different, but you can think of them as a tag team. And now, of course, physical health also is intertwined with them. But right now, just focusing on mental and emotional health. So mental health specifically refers to your cognitive function or your brain function. And what do our brains do? Our brains have one job, and that is to process information, right? We have all these stimuli around us and we bring them in, and our brain is going to process that information. Our emotional health, our emotions, because we have that frontal lobe in our brain, though that's going to be the part that informs the way that we respond or react to the information we've just processed. So mental health, process the information; emotional health, respond to that information. So, excuse me. And so that's why when we see somebody who's under a high level of stress or potentially has a mental illness, what's happening, I explain it as this, that that information is getting to their brain, but because of the stress or other problems in their brain, that information, think of it, it's getting warped. So although we may all be here and get the same piece of information, maybe I'm having a really stressful week, or my depression and anxiety are kind of flaring up, whatever it might be. So I'm going to get that information, but because these other things are in my brain, I'm going to warp that information, or it's not going to get processed totally the right way. So then our emotional health, my response or reaction to that information, to you, it may seem inappropriate, or it may seem, off base or misguided. And that's, kind of the simplest way for me to explain it, right? Why when people are stressed or have mental illness, where sometimes they say or do things that make us uncomfortable, but know that for them, in their mind, they're just reacting as they normally would to something. It's just that their brain is not giving them the information quite the same way. They're not processing it quite the same way. So that was a long explanation of those two, but I just think it's so cool the way our brains work. But think about that. So, we see these three legs, and really you can see you need all three legs of your stool to work together. So you need your physical health, but you also need your mental health and your emotional health. I also will add here that our emotional health is the one that is most closely tied to our social connections as well. So being social, having friends, interacting with people, that is really beneficial to our emotional health, because it allows us to process and react to things that are going on in our lives. And so just, if imagine one of these legs, you cut 1 inch off of the leg, what's going to happen? The stool will still be upright, right? And so I say that to people too, just like with us, when we're having a tough time, maybe we are physically injured or mentally just stressed, having a rough day, we've been isolated for a long time, haven't seen people, we're still upright. But again, imagine that 1 inch off of the leg. What happens to a stool like that? It will still stay upright. You can still sit on it, but it's going to be a little more uncomfortable. You're going to have to work a little bit harder to kind of stay on there and stay in position. And so again, think of that seat as holding your load or all the weight in your day to day. And what are you going to do? That shifting, it's not flat anymore. So you're moving around, you're trying to make it work. And so I really encourage people to think about the interconnectedness of all three of these. It's not just, I need to take care of my physical health and that's it. You really need to take care of all three equally. They all need the same amount of attention. So diving into mental health just a little bit deeper, because we know there's a lot of stigma around mental health and mental illness and stress and all of those things. And there's nothing, let me restart. There's a lot of stigma around those. And a lot of that has to do with, as you can see on this slide, this kind of old narrative. As we were first starting to study, brains and cognitive function and all of that, it was believed that mental illness and mental health were on the same spectrum, opposite ends of the same spectrum. So either you were mentally healthy or you were mentally ill, right? Because we think of that for our physical health. You're in good health or you're ill. But it's a little more complicated with that for mental health and mental illness. They are not mutually exclusive. They certainly can interact. They can inform one another. but they are not the same. They are not, opposites of each other. So this really great graphic comes from Corey Keyes, who's a researcher, and he studies this concept that he has called mental flourishing. So you can see here, he made this really great dual continuum. And for me, this really helps explain the difference between mental health and mental illness. So as you can see, we have two spectra here that intersect. So on the vertical axis, from its mental health, so from top to bottom, optimal mental health to poor mental health. And then the horizontal axis represents mental illness. So from left to right, we go to severe mental illness to no mental illness. And so this creates quadrants, and you can see there quadrant 1. So there we're up on the top. So we're in optimal mental health, no mental illness. That's the mental flourishing right there. That's where we want people. We want them to be flourishing. So then what we can see sometimes is still no mental illness, but we have stress on our mental health. And we've seen that in agriculture for the past several years. And I think especially in 2020 with the pandemic and everything else that was going on in our world, that stressed not just people in the agricultural community, but everyone. And I think a lot of people were in quadrant 2, whether they realized it or not. And that's where people are languishing. So thankfully, no mental illness, but severe stress on mental health. So you are not flourishing, right? Because you're not at your best. Think of your 3-legged stool. Your mental health leg is maybe an inch or 2 shorter than the other 2. Quadrant 2 is also where we want to be intervening with people. So if you are worried about somebody, taking the time to say something to them, ask them how they're doing, just so that we can intervene before things get worse, because then there is quadrant 3. And, we don't know for sure what causes mental illness. The best theories right now are, there could be several causes. A chemical imbalance in the brain is a very common one. It could be tied to, family history, genetics. And then also you can develop mental illness from chronic stress. So if you are so stressed for so long, you can develop a mental illness. So you're still languishing, but now there's a mental illness there too. And when I say mental illness, I'm referring to any diagnosable mental illness. So anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD, ADHD, all of those. And so also what we see a lot with people in quadrant 3 is that either they haven't been diagnosed with their mental illness yet, or they've been diagnosed, but they're not treating their symptoms. So they aren't going to therapy, or if maybe they were medicated, they aren't taking their medication anymore. Quadrant 3 is really, people in quadrant 3 are in pretty dire straits. The good news is you can move around quadrants and you can move up into quadrant 4. So for me, this is where it all comes together. Quadrant 4 is somebody who has a mental illness, but is in fact still flourishing because their mental health is well taken care of and their mental illness is well managed. So I know about this from lived experience. So I am coming to you today from quadrant 4. I was diagnosed about a year and a half ago with anxiety and depression. And it has been a long and difficult journey. I won't try to sugarcoat it. I won't get into details right now because we don't have 5 hours. But I'm more than happy to share more about my story and its intimate details. If you're ever interested, please just let me know. But, so I'm managing my mental illness. I take medications. I also go to therapy once a week. So I'm on a pretty intensive therapy schedule. But those things have helped clear up that space in my mind that I can take care of my general day-to-day mental health. So just practicing self-care, doing those things that make me feel good. Don't get me wrong. I still have bad days. I still have days where I'm ultra stressed. Things come up, work is stressful, dealing with family and friends can be stressful. So I'm still human is my point. And anybody who's in good mental health, you can still have bad days. That doesn't mean, oh no, all of a sudden I'm in quadrant 2 or quadrant 3. It most likely is just that you had a bad day. So really quickly, I feel like we're well aware of a lot of the stressors that farmers face, and these aren't just farmers. This can be stressors across agriculture. I mean, we know the impact the economy is having. We know the impact weather can have. I have disaster on there, so that can be severe weather. I would also throw global pandemic under there as a disaster. Thinking about peacetime emergencies and those kinds of things. Other stressors, government regulations, long work hours. And this one, that's hard because I think a lot of us, wear that as a badge of honor, how hard we work. I think of even in my own family, both of my brothers and my dad farm, and my one brother, oh yeah, I've been up for 20 hours, or I worked for 20 hours, or whatever it might be. And it's like, okay, great, but that's not great. Like, that's not a good thing. That's not healthy. That's not safe for anyone. And I always kind of remind people, and I have to remind myself this too, because for whatever reason, us humans are hardwired to complain and to try to outdo one another. And I just have to remind myself, at the end of our life, there is no trophy for the person who suffered the most. So why would you let yourself suffer? And I get long work hours are sometimes just part of it. I had a long work day yesterday. I worked for 13 hours, which, for somebody with a cushy extension job, it's a long work day. But yeah, that can be stressful. That takes its toll on our minds and especially on our bodies too. Other stressors, any issues related to crops, livestock, machinery, illnesses and injuries on the farm can add a high level of stress. In my family, my dad and my brother are both missing limbs from agricultural accidents. My dad lost his leg before I was born, but my brother lost his arm about 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. And I mean, that was an incredibly stressful time for our family. We were still milking cows. And I always say this to people. To this day, I do not know who milked the cows the day of my brother's accident, because my entire family was at the hospital. I didn't even know, right? And it's like, that was the farthest thing from my mind. And that just goes to show how stressful that can be on your whole family system, which onto that next bullet point, relationships. That's stressful. Farming is very family centered, which is something I love about it, but it can be tricky working day in and day out with your family. How do you separate the two? How do you separate family and business? And a lot of times you can't, and that can be really hard. Tied in with that too, I would add farm transitions, though. That is a huge stressor on farms that I don't think we give it enough credit for being such a big stressor. But it's really hard as you start to think about the future of your farm and where you want to go. And then lastly, there are barriers to help. Actual, environmental barriers, whether that's, the closest therapist is an hour drive one way away. But then there's also those perceived barriers. So stigma, or I don't want people to think I'm crazy, or I don't want people to see my vehicle parked outside, the therapist's office, those kinds of things. And that's stressful too, feeling like I need help, but I can't get help for one reason or another. So I mentioned the farm transition thing, and I think that along with, talking to a lot of our agricultural lenders, they talk about, well, yeah, I work with these farmers, and why don't they get that? It's like, if you just liquidated some assets, if we just sold 40 acres or, got rid of half the cows, things would be so much better. And so there's this other piece, this other stressor that I think is so hard to explain. And it is explained really, really beautifully, I think, heartbreakingly so, by Dr. Mike Roseman, who is a farmer and a psychologist from Iowa. So he's looked into this for 40 years, and he kind of coined this term, the agrarian imperative. So he says, to farmers, the land is everything. Ownership of a family farm is a triumphant result of the struggles of multiple generations. Losing the family farm is the ultimate loss, bringing shame to the generation that has let down their forebears and dashing the hopes for successors. That's some pretty heavy stuff. And even for me, as somebody who is, my family still farms, I'm not on the farm every day. I don't consider myself a farmer. But as someone who works with farmers, I also still really feel this. I'm really empathetic towards it, and that I don't want to see other people lose their farms either, because I know how important it is. I know what it really means. And then Dr. Roseman kind of doubled down and followed up on this in 2010, where he talked about how the agrarian imperative impels farmers to hang on to their land at all costs. The agrarian imperative instills farmers to work incredibly hard, to endure unusual pain and hardship, and to take uncommon risks. Work incredibly hard, unusual pain and hardship, uncommon risks. I don't know about you, but that sounds like every farmer I've ever met in my life. We always say farmers are the ultimate gamblers. And I think this really gets at that. And now we see why. We see that connection there to it, that, holding on to the farm, to that legacy, to that tradition, to that lifestyle, it's everything. And it's very hard to kind of put your finger on it sometimes. And I think that's what makes farm transition so stressful, is because this is floating either consciously, but usually subconsciously, in everybody's mind. This need to continue the legacy of the farm. So really quickly to fly through kind of identifying stress, it is my hope that all of you know how to identify your own stress. So stress can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. And so you can see here, kind of falls under 5 major categories, but you'll see physical, emotional, and cognitive, which could also be mental. Your 3-legged stool. Ta-da! There it is. It suffers. Those areas suffer when you're under stress. And then, of course, behavioral and self-worth, and those kind of tie into cognitive and emotional as well. But again, I'm sure you're kind of glancing at this list. Hopefully, again, you know what your signs of stress are, because your body is trying to tell you something's wrong so that you can attend to it. I know for me, when I'm really stressed, I get the worst stomach ache. Oh man. And it's different than any other stomach ache. I know it's a stress stomach ache. So that's one for me. I also usually on the emotional side get way more anxious and kind of way more short and snippy, kind of angry with people. Also the cognitive ones are huge for me. Cannot concentrate to save my life. I have a lot of difficulty making simple decisions. And so knowing these things about yourself, but then also, knowing how stress manifests, especially in the people you're closest with. So your spouse, your children, your siblings, etc. So you can know what's going on with people. And okay, I know that when so-and-so complains about having a headache, it's probably because they're stressed. So, being aware of that, I think, is really important. One thing I will add is that, again, I talked in the beginning about having bad days. And so you may experience some of these things during a bad day. Actually, this week, I had a bad day. I had a stomach ache. I couldn't focus. It was all of that. But it was just a day. So what we are really looking for is not, oh my gosh, I felt these things just today, so I, need to be diagnosed, or there's something wrong with me. I hope that isn't the case. What we really watch for is bad days that turn into bad weeks, that turn into a bad month. That's that prolonged stress, that chronic stress that we're really looking out for. So some signs of prolonged stress. Previously identified signs have not improved or multiplied. So think about the slide one before this. You notice those things, it's not just a bad day, right? You felt that way for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And maybe you're getting more manifestations of stress. So besides just the stomach ache, suddenly there's ulcers, or now you're getting headaches, whatever it may be. A change in routine. So, especially if you're involved in organizations or go to certain meetings or church, whatever it may be, and you stop going, you kind of give up those responsibilities, become complacent to it. Appearance declines, and this can be appearance of the individual from a grooming and hygiene standpoint, appearance of the farm, appearance of the house. I think we all know what our baselines are, and right. And I get that some people are just a little more messy, and that's okay. I get it. I'm there with you. And you should know that too, especially in the people in your life, like what's baseline, but what is below baseline too. There can also be an increase in illness because, as we know, stress, it releases a lot of cortisol, and that can impact your physical health greatly, which is why we see those physical health things. Are you getting the theme here? Physical, mental, emotional. Also, we see an increase in accidents, and that can be really on the cognitive side of, lack of concentration, being really overwhelmed, kind of missing a little detail, absent-mindedness, and also could just be general complacency. You're so stressed and it's like you just kind of don't care. You're just going through the motions. And lastly, this one's really important. Family members show signs of stress. I do some work too on the youth farm stress side, and that's something we really talk about, is that try as you might to shield kids from what's really going on. They are so much smarter than we ever think, and they know what's going on. They're very in tune to it. And so trying to hide it from them and trying to hide your stress can just create more stress in them. Also spouses, siblings, etc. So these are really the pieces we want to look for when we're thinking about chronic stress. So I'm sure you're all thinking like, okay, and I said it before, like, if you're worried about somebody, you should really reach out to them, talk to them. And that's a really common question I get of like, what do I do if I'm worried? Talk to them, say something to them. Yes, it can be hard. It can be uncomfortable. It can be scary, but it is critical. And I don't say this to be over dramatic, but in some situations, it is a matter of life and death. And I have had those conversations with people like, Emily, if you wouldn't have called, I don't know if I would be here. It's a really powerful thing to hear from somebody, and to think that it was just a good intentioned phone call or text message that made all the difference for someone. And that's because individuals who are stressed feel isolated, and farmers naturally work in isolation. And now with the world we're living in today, isolation is a part of it. And so, and they feel isolated in the sense too, that they have convinced themselves that nobody understands, nobody cares, nobody knows what it's like. Nobody else out there experiences this, which we know is not true on any of those accounts. And so, helping them feel less isolated and realize like, hey, there's somebody in your corner rooting for you can be really helpful. And lastly, just acknowledging that someone is suffering can offer them relief. Again, that isolation piece, or people feeling like nobody understands, nobody knows. And this is you going, hey, I do understand, I do know. I know for me, when I would say I was in mental crisis at that point. And some people in my life finally speaking up really just took a huge weight off my shoulders. And so yes, it is so uncomfortable, and I know it's hard, and I know we're afraid of people getting mad at us. But something a farmer told me once, she goes, Emily, it's better to lose a friendship than a friend. So that's something I kind of carry with me every day when I start to have those doubts of, I don't want to say anything and make someone mad. I go, I'd rather make them mad and have them be alive, because we never know. So you're probably thinking, okay, but what do I actually say? I get that question a lot too. So these are some conversation starters that I pulled from mentalhealth.gov, and I really like them. You'll notice as I put each one up here, they all follow the same formula. And that is that they have what I call a statement of concern, and then a very open-ended question. So you never want to be accusing people. You never want to end your question with, are you? You're not depressed, are you? I remember I had a friend, again, when I was not doing well. And he said, "You're not going crazy on me, are you?" When you end a question with "are you," you're just begging the person to say no. No, I'm fine. It's fine. And so just being really considerate and compassionate towards that and asking questions that allow them to steer the conversation so that if they are ready to talk about it, they can. And if they're not, they can very easily and gracefully, steer the conversation another direction. So I've been worried about you. Can we talk about what you're experiencing? Or who are you comfortable talking to? It's a great one. This next one is my favorite. I'm someone who cares and wants to listen. What do you want me to know about how you're feeling? So you can see really, putting yourself out there is like, I'm somebody who's in your corner. I'm somebody you can trust. I'm somebody who does worry about you. And then again, really letting them take the lead in how much or how little they tell you. And lastly, it seems like you're going through a difficult time. How can I help you find help? That one I really, really like because I get a lot of people who, with me and I've, received some additional training in mental health first aid and some suicide prevention training. So, I can go into these situations ready to go. But I recognize that not everybody's like that. They're like, well, I after asking this question, I wouldn't know what else to say. Like, I can't help them. I'm not a counselor and, and neither am I. But so that's a great one because it's like, how can I help you find help? So you're admitting to them, like, I know I'm not the person, but I want to get you to that person. That's the role I can play. So that's a really good one, I think. So I've laid a lot at your feet here already in just, about 35 minutes or so. And I'm sure you're kind of like, okay, what's the point of this again? Now I'm just feeling overwhelmed about it all. And I get that. And we're all human and talking about stress is just stressful, and I do it for a job and it's still kind of like, yeah, this is some heavy stuff. So we need to think about how can we as individuals best help ourselves, our family, our neighbors, what's going to make us at our best to do this. Da, da, da. You have to take care of yourself. And I think that is so against the nature of farm women, especially farmers in general. We make sure everybody else is taken care of first, right? I'm sure you're all like me. Whenever I have guests, or even if I'm just cooking for my family, I make sure everybody has their plate and is eating, and then I'll get mine and start. And that's so great. I love that compassion. I love that that's how, many of us were raised and what we believe in, but you need to take care of yourself too. You have to remember to adjust your own oxygen mask. If you've ever flown, in the emergency messaging, they're like, oh, if the cabin loses air pressure, these masks will come down. What do they always say? Adjust your own oxygen mask before helping others. They don't say walk around the plane and make sure everybody else's mask is on right first, and then you can put yours on. They say adjust your own mask first. So that's my challenge to you, maybe in this next week. What can you do to adjust your own oxygen mask first? And I say this because this is something somebody told me once, and it was that you can't pour from an empty cup. As try as we might, pouring ourselves into other people is great, but then there's not always enough left for us. So we need to be doing things that will help us refill our cups and give us that capacity to do all of the other things in our day, right? I'm not saying give up on taking care of other people, never do that. Do that, but also make sure you're doing these pieces that can fill your empty cup. And you can do that by practicing intentional well-being. So really thinking about your wellness and your health and taking a concentrated effort to take care of it. And I have to throw this on there, especially for all of you, self-care is not selfish. Somewhere along the line, something went very, very wrong. And we started to think that people who took care of themselves were being selfish. I think it's a very selfless thing to take care of yourself because you are preparing yourself to take care of others. But again, you have to come first. And also I'll throw on there, I know self-care is another one of those kind of buzzwords. What does it really mean? if you Google it, if you look it up, self-care by definition is any intentional action taken to take care of some area of your health. Physical, mental, emotional. Taking a shower is self-care. Sleeping, eating, self-care. Reading a book you enjoy, self-care. Pursuing a hobby you like, self-care. And I know when I put it like that, I mean, I make it sound really lighthearted and like, oh, it's so easy. And I know that it's not always easy to take care of ourselves and put ourselves first. It's like some days I would say, so my dad is pretty ill right now and I provide a lot of his care, and I'll get back from the hospital and I'm just like, I'm exhausted. Like, yes, I should eat, but like, but it's really important that I do that. I need to eat so that I physically feel good and so that my cup is filled up and my oxygen mask is adjusted so that I can continue caring for him. So I am going to go through some different strategies to promote wellness or some self-care ideas. And we'll go through these individually. And I think you'll see as we go how these, there's a whole mix here of things that are really good for physical health, really good for mental health, really good for emotional health, and some that are good for a combination of two or all three. So deep breathing, simple, right? And I'm sure we've all been in stressful situations when perhaps somebody has said, just take a deep breath. And they say that and all you want to do is punch them in the face. At least I know that happens to me. I'm human, okay? But really there's some sage advice in that. So the point of deep breathing is, yes, to completely stop yourself where you're at and to, if you've ever heard of grounding or centering before, that's really what it comes back to. And so it is a very quick way to really quickly stop your brain and just let yourself reset. And all you're going to do is breathe. And the important part here is that you're going to focus only on your breathing, nothing else. So I am really quickly going to teach you my favorite deep breathing exercise. There's all sorts of ones out there. But this one is called box breathing. So think of a box, 4. You're going to draw a box 4 seconds at a time. So what we're going to do is we're going to inhale for 4 seconds, hold our breath for 4 seconds, exhale over 4 seconds, and then lastly, rest for 4 seconds before we take our next inhale. So I really encourage you all to participate in this with me. I know most of you have your cameras off. That's fine. But again, you're welcome to do this with me. What I'm going to ask you to do is make sure you're kind of sitting up straight. You have both feet flat on the floor, so that your chest and your stomach are really opened up so that you can get a nice deep breath in. So I will count us through an entire cycle and then I'll cue you through one more cycle. So let's all take a nice deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold it, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, and just relax, 2, 3, 4. Again, inhale, hold it, exhale, and relax. So hopefully you participated in that exercise. And I know for me, like even just now, I always feel a little bit better after I do it. Maybe not hugely better, but like, oh, like that was just nice because that was what, so 30 seconds, 32 seconds that we just spent doing that. And if you were doing it, hopefully you realize that in that moment, that's all you were paying attention to, right? Were just the cues, just my voice. Maybe you had your eyes closed, and you were just going through it. So that's a good one. Taking deep breathing, I think a step further, we have meditation or reflection. You can call it all kinds of different things. And I think it takes a lot of different forms, but that expands on the idea of deep breathing in that you are going to kind of shut your brain off from all of your thoughts. And what I like, a good meditation should tell you, if you do a guided meditation, that it's like, you don't need to try to keep your brain empty, right? Thoughts are going to drift into your head as you're doing it. The important thing is that you recognize that that thought is there, but you don't let it take over all of your brain space and start thinking about it. You just go, oh, yep, I'm thinking about what I'm going to eat for lunch when I'm done with this, but I'm going to continue on this journey, and focus on these different things. And if doing a guided meditation or something like that doesn't sound like your thing, that's okay. You can meditate in other ways or reflect in other ways. And a really popular one, one that I like too, is journaling. And again, here too, it doesn't need to be anything crazy. I read in this one book, the author is like a self-help book. And she goes, yeah, I do something, it's called the morning pages. Every morning I wake up and the first thing I do is I write 3 pages in my journal. That sounds impossible to somebody like me sometimes, right? And I'm getting up and trying to do all these things. But what I try to do is I carve out space every day to write something. Sometimes I write just 2 words. Sometimes I write 3 things I was grateful for that day. I'll write down 5 good things that happened. I'll write down the 4 most beautiful things that I saw that day. And with the snowfall, whew, that's easy. But yeah, it's just about taking some time to practice gratitude, or again, let your mind, be freed from all of its luggage and baggage for a few minutes. And I always tell people, like, the cool thing about meditation is it's about leaving your problems. Don't worry, they will be there waiting for you when you come back. So you can take 10 minutes to let them sit, and you can always come back to them. And so it's really important that we're giving ourselves those breaks. Positive self-talk and just positive mindset, that's an easy one. Think about the example I always give people is, when you're running the internal monologue in your head, are you thinking about the things that you have to do, or are they the things that you get to do? Right? I have to make dinner for my family. I get to make dinner for my family. Positive mindset. It's really simple. All it takes is one word to change the way that you view something. And I do caution on this one. There is such a thing as what we call toxic positivity. So basically where we are trying, or we've just decided to be so positive and see the silver linings and the bright side of everything, that we have basically put blinders on to the truth, to reality. So I really encourage realistic positivity, it's called. So you can be optimistic and want good things and have a good attitude, but still know that it's just like, yep, the ground is just too wet. We just got too much rain. That, not, oh, it's so great. You don't have to do that. I'm here to absolve you of those feelings. So moving on, physical activity. This one, I'm a huge proponent of, and I know Jennifer, she's a runner. I'm one of those people. I get up every day at 4:30 in the morning and go to the gym. I know not everybody's like that, and that's okay. There are other ways to move your body. Walk the dog, play with the kids, just go for a walk on your own. Let that be your 10-minute meditation time. Going for a walk, being outside is so good for that. The one thing I tell people, because I know whether you're a farmer or you work in some area of ag, your job is likely physically demanding. I encourage you to do some sort of physical activity that is outside of what you would normally do for work. Because again, it's physical activity as self-care. It's something you're doing for yourself versus this is just a part of my job that I do for everybody else. So I really encourage that. And that's kind of in the same vein as hobbies. And for some people, their hobby is physical, but have a hobby outside of farming, right? Because like you asked my brothers and my dad, oh, what's your hobby? Farming. Well, no, that's your job too. And it's great if it's somebody's hobby and something they're passionate about, but having other things that just allow us to, again, step out of our family role and our work role and our friend role and enjoy things, watching sports, cooking, reading, writing, whatever it may be. And then connecting with your social network. I talked about how important it is to our emotional health to socially connect with people. But here too, you can see where some of these fold together is, maybe you have a buddy that you will go on walks with. So you're getting that social connection and you're getting that physical activity piece in. It's great. 2 birds, 1 stone, etc. And I know that connecting socially has been challenging the last year, as we are all at different comfort levels and availabilities to see people face to face. But, get on Zoom like this. Like for me, this is still social connectedness and I love it. You can maybe tell I'm an extrovert social butterfly to the max. So human interaction is important for me. But it's important for anybody, even if you are shy or an introvert, you probably still have those core people you can go to, and it's important to do that. Um, Also, speaking with a mental health professional, I think that there is a misconception out there that psychologists or therapists are only for sick people, only for people that have mental illness. And that is not the case. They are for everyone because mental health is for everyone. It is everyone's responsibility. It is in everyone's life and it's a part of who we all are. And, speaking with a mental health professional can seem scary, but I know for a lot of people, it's, they go once a month and kind of go and get a tune up. And I mentioned I go weekly right now to manage some of my symptoms, but it's yes. And I'm somebody I have seen a mental health professional, I've gone to a therapist prior to all of my other things too. And it's been really helpful. So again, hopefully as I was going through that list, you were able to pick out hopefully some ones that you already do, hopefully one or two that you want to and are willing to try and will try this week. And hopefully you again saw the connections. Think back to our three-legged stool, physical, mental, emotional. A lot of these, going to the gym, it's very good for my body, but gosh, it's so good for my mind too, which is really great. So kind of wrapping up here, I am mindful of the time. Just some resources. So I did put our Minnesota website on there, z.umn.edu/rural stress, or you can just do extension.umn.edu. Also, the Iowa Concern Hotline and their whole network of resources. So extension.iastate.edu/Iowa Concern. I'm really fortunate. I get to work with a lot of my Iowa colleagues on issues around farm and rural stress. And so I know what a great resource Iowa Concern is. And then extension, of course, in general, your local extension office, any extension professional, they should be able to provide you with some different resources they have available. Your Department of Agriculture should have some things. Your physician. So some people ask me like, okay, but what if I think I do need to see a therapist, or maybe I do need medication? Talk to your doctor about it. I know that's where I got the recommendation for my therapist. I had been seeing someone else I didn't really like. And so I talked to my doctor because I have a better relationship with them, and they matched me up with somebody who has been the perfect fit. Also reach out to your faith-based community. I know a lot of priests, pastors, etc., deacons, they have no problem, talking to people or helping them talk through some things and find additional resources. So those are some resources for you there. And I just like to close with some reminders. It is okay to not be okay. Bad days will happen, and that's fine. Just remember that you are not alone. It's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to offer help to people too, even if you aren't sure. Do that. So that's all that I have. I did throw my contact information on there. If there's anything I can do for you, if you just need somebody to talk to, or you have some questions, or you aren't sure where to go, I offer myself as a resource to all of you here. So please do not be afraid to reach out at any time. I'm more than happy to hear from you and to talk with you or connect you, whatever it may be. And then my little mantra there: make your mental health a priority. But I should add, and physical and emotional too. Make your three-legged stool a priority. Maybe that's what I should have it say. But with that, so that's all I have for my slideshow here. And I just want to thank you all for taking the time to be on this call today. I know you're all busy. I know you all have a lot going on, but I think it's so important that we have these conversations, and it always means a lot to me when people tune into them. So thank you so much. And I imagine we have a little time here for questions and things, Jennifer.
Yeah, if people want to put anything into the chat box, or we're a small enough group, if you want to unmute, you're more than welcome to do that. Whether it's a question or you just have maybe an idea that's working well for you that you want to share with the group, I think that's always good to share. I know Emily mentioned, I like to run as well, and that's just one of my things that relieves my stress, and it's a physical thing as well. So I'm kind of killing two birds with one stone there. But just in the last month, I started journaling, and I was kind of like you, Emily. I'm like, I can't write 3 pages every day. This is just overwhelming. But writing 2-3 words in the morning, just something that you're grateful for, makes a huge difference. So things like that, just it can be small things. So yeah, we'll take any questions. So there was a question, will the slides be available for us? And yes, so after the webinar is done here today, everybody that had registered for the Boots in the Barn series will get the PDF as well as this recording if they want to go back and review the things. More than welcome to do that. So yep, we'll definitely make sure you have that. Any other questions? Well, I did put in the Qualtrics evaluation as well, if you want to click on it there, or I will put it in the email this afternoon along with your PDF file, just to fill out to help us with their evaluation. Appreciate Emily being on this call. It really provided a lot of good practical framework for, what we can do for ourselves and for others. We did have a question come in, Emily. Is there a sentence or framework that works better for the males in our life? That's a good question.
Ooh, I will say personally, I'm not somebody who gets too caught up in gender differences, because I think even among women, we all react to these types of conversations differently. I mean, I think the big thing is just, openness, honesty. A lot, like, people do not need you to sugarcoat things. And yeah, I know I'm somebody, like, I know some people will say things like, "Oh, just tell them to man up," or I tend to stay away from that, because that kind of gets back into this whole, like, "Oh, just snap out of it," like it's just a decision we're making to feel this way. So yeah, I think it's probably a little bit harder to start those conversations, and it maybe takes a little bit more persistence, where maybe, yes, with a woman, you could, ask one of those questions I shared before once, and there you go. And a man may try to sidestep it, but just be persistent. Check in with them every few days or once a week. Yeah, I can't say that I have any specific, like, here's the thing that works for every male. It's not that way. It really depends on your relationship to that person, and what they are like, if they are more stoic, if they are more sensitive, etc.
Great, thanks, Emily. And I would assume with youth too, that's probably, a lot of these tips that you provided here today are good things that we can help our kids if they're dealing with stress. And also, just letting their counselors be aware, or their school teachers be aware of maybe things are going on, so that maybe they could spend some time working with them a little bit more individually. Do you have any experience with that as well with the youth?
Yeah, on the youth side, it's really about, like, having those conversations with them. And like I said before, kids know when things aren't going well. And so it's really important that we are, honest with them. They don't need to know every detail. Right. But it's like going, yeah, like, here's what's going on, and here's what we're doing about it. And, ask them if they have ideas. Kids are so much smarter than us. They're geniuses. So, making them part of the solution too, instead of treating them like, oh, they're part of the problem if they know, because it's going to be too hard on them. Kids are tough, they're resilient, and helping them be a part of these different processes that we go through will make them more resilient. We build resilience in adversity. So if we're trying to shield people from that adversity, we're not doing them any favors that way.
Looks like we had another question that I believe in forgiveness is important and self-healing and affects mental health. How do you help someone who on the outside seems fine, but there is bitterness and no forgiveness towards a family member due to a land issue?
Ooh, yes, that is difficult. And I know that a lot of families have been fractured by land issues, farm transfer issues, whatever it may be, families, neighbors, friends, etc. And yeah, I think forgiveness is important. And again, I can't say that I have any right answer to do that. But I think that, again, you don't want to be accusatory, like, well, I think it's really that you're mad about this. People don't like somebody else putting words in their mouth. But just asking, like, is there something else that's going on? Or, and for those situations, you may need an actual mediator or a counselor. Or I see Colleen put in there, like, encouraging people, like, what can you let go of? And something that I ask myself, and I try to kind of encourage other people to think this way. It's from one of my meditations that I do, is to let go of the things that no longer serve you, right? So bitterness towards people, like being, so some of you know this, I'm divorced. Being bitter at my ex-husband does not serve me. Was there a point in time when I was very bitter and very upset and hurt and angry and everything else under the sun? Absolutely. And do those feelings still flare up every now and then? Absolutely. I'm human. But I tell myself, like, this doesn't serve me anymore. It does me no good to focus on those things. And so again, I know that's not, a perfect cookie cutter, here's what to do, here's what to say answer, Tammy. But hopefully that helps. And hopefully that helps each of you too, to think about those things, like what thoughts don't serve you anymore. So that's something that very much keeps me centered and grounded.
I'm just going to share this last slide here, Emily, but if there's any other questions in the chat box, we can still take those.
Yes, and of course, if you would rather reach out to me privately one-on-one, please feel free to do that. And if you weren't able to snag my info, I know that Jennifer has it, so you can connect with her.
Well, thanks, Emily, for being on the call here today. We really appreciate it. Really a lot of good tips that we can implement right away when we're talking about ourselves or we're concerned about somebody else, whether that's a family member or a friend. I think there's a lot of value in what you gave us here today. So we appreciate that. Just as a reminder, as we wrap up, we will have one more webinar next Friday. Again, that will be a dairy women's panel. And so I have three dairy women, whether I have a herdswoman, and I have somebody who works in the industry, and then also a dairy farm operation owner herself. So they're gonna share some tips and tricks that they're using on the farm, and really looking forward to that conversation as well. So I'm going to take a look and see on my screen here if there's any more questions, Emily. Doesn't look like it. So appreciate everybody being on here today. And again, thanks, Emily. With that, everybody have a good day.
Yes, thanks for having me, Jennifer. Thanks everyone for taking the time to be here.